Professor Oak and the other professors are Pokemon experts, right? They know everything there is to know. They are at the forefront of their fields. They have made huge contributions to Pokemon research, but have they? We tend to assume that they actually discovered a lot of what they tell us, but there's actually very little evidence that that is necessarily the case. They talk a lot of science and they teach the player characters a lot, but the specifics of their research are very foggy. Let's quickly go over what each professor has demonstrably accomplished. As usual, I will be focusing on the game canon only. You can watch this video to find out why, but still, it's possible that I've missed something in my research, and if I did, please let me know in the comments. As you'll see when we get to the end of the video, this is not an open and shut case. But anyway, Professor Oak is a very famous professor. He's got his radio show. A lot of the other professors studied either with him or under him, but still his only definite achievement is the Pokédex. Which, don't get me wrong, it's an absolutely important contribution. It's an amazing piece of technology, but we don't really know the details of how it was developed. It's unclear how personally involved Oak was with the development of the technology itself. I would guess that the Sylph Company had something to do with it, or even with the content of the Pokédex. As we've discussed before, the text is full of errors, and in Let's Go, it's implied that trainers had to note down location data by hand on maps before the Pokédexes exist, and that would be where the database of locations came from. So other than coordinating the whole project, what did Oak really do? Oak's former underling Professor Elm, though, he does have a definite discovery to his name, and that is that Pikachu is an evolved Pokemon. Still, in Generation 2, he seems completely unaware of the existence of Pokemon eggs until Mr. Pokemon gives one to the player to give to him. He then examines the egg and suspects that it needs to be with active Pokemon in a party in order to hatch. So you could say that him giving the egg back to the player is just part of his research, that's his way of testing his hypothesis if he can't do it himself. So you could credit him with that discovery. But then, in Gen 4, he treats eggs as if they're old news, so who knows? If your Pokemon gets infected with Pokerus, Professor Elm gives you a phone call saying that he discovered Pokerus. But it's unclear, based on how things are phrased, whether he discovered that as in found it in the laboratory or read about it. And I'm inclined, because of the language, towards the latter. And still, he doesn't know what it is or how it really works. The situation just gets more and more dire as we progress through the generations. Professor Birch is the author of several books, and he is known to do more field research than the others, but we don't actually know any of the results of his research. Rowan is said to have discovered that 90% of Pokemon are connected through evolution, but even though this figure is all over Bulbapedia and the internet in general, I was actually not able to find the specific piece of dialogue that this comes from. I'm sure it's real, I just couldn't find it. And in any case, it's only accurate if you don't count any legendary Pokemon, and if you count each stage of an evolutionary line separately, which for this kind of statistic doesn't make any sense to count like Charmander, Charmeleon, and Charizard each as separate Pokemon. Like, of course Charmander, Charmeleon, and Charizard are connected through evolution. If you're looking at like a starter line and like Farfetch'd, right? Those are two families. But if you're counting them separately, you're saying that 75% of Pokemon are connected through evolution, when really there's only two of them. Rowan also learned that certain Pokemon only evolve in specific locations, but again, just like with Professor Elm and Pokerus, it's not clear how he learned this. In Generation 5, we see Juniper researching Clink, and she finds no evidence that Clink existed more than 100 years ago, which is very interesting, but it's also kind of minor. And when she's asked to find out how to awaken Reshiram or Zekrom from the White Stone or Dark Stone, depending on the game, she doesn't come up with an answer. Sycamore talks a lot about Mega Evolution, but he doesn't really seem to know very much. He calls it the biggest mystery in the Kalos region, which is a great reason to study it. But if he was actually studying it, you'd have expected him to make some kind of progress, and that doesn't seem to be the case. When he tells you that a bond is required between the trainer and the Pokemon to get Mega Evolution, he calls it just a hypothesis. And in any case, it seems to be wrong because you can Mega Evolve a Pokemon that you literally just caught. The idea that Megastones were created when the ultimate weapon was fired, he calls that a theory, and not a capital T theory like the theory of evolution. And the keystone on your Mega Ring, he refers to that as a mysterious stone that turns Pokemon feelings into some kind of wavelength. It's all very vague language, very hypothetical, and no definite answers. He does figure out that the Anastar Sundial can power up the Mega Ring, but he also says that the relationship between the two isn't understood at all. But at least in Sun and Moon, Dexio and Sina say that he was the one who discovered the Zygarde Cube. Again, details of that discovery are not found, but I guess it's something.
I think he just found it.
It's possible.
He just found the cube, he didn't, discover it or anything about it.
He might have discovered how it works. We don't really know. He just discovered it, whatever that means.
I think he found it. Just give him...
Oh, look!
Just give him the reputation of several of the professors at this point.
Exactly. And we're not done yet. Kukui spends the entire game guiding the player, but we never find out any specifics of his research. He studies moves, but he doesn't teach the player anything special about them, only the usual stuff that any other professor might teach. He does teach us how to use Z-moves, but again, there's no implication that he discovered any of it. But why is that? Why is it that the professors, who are very prominent characters in every game, why is it they don't have specific achievements to their name? Why are they so vague, and why don't they talk about their research? Even other characters rarely credit them with specific discoveries, but they have PhDs, for crying out loud. In Japanese, they're called doctor instead of professor, and in most disciplines, you can't get a PhD without doing original research. But here's the weird thing. Many smaller characters have actual accomplishments that they are credited with, as small as Bugsy, who discovered the move Fury Cutter, which as far as I can tell is more to show than Kukui has for his move research. Clement developed the Rotom Dex, which includes an interface for human Pokemon communication. Cedric Juniper added the habitat list to the Unova Pokedex, although he did also say that nobody knows what's inside Dragon Spiral Tower because nobody has been inside it. Guess what, Cedric? Nobody has been to Mars either, and we found a way to learn about it. Characters like Cosmo, Fennel, Burnett, they are actively working with and developing very fancy technology. Mon, the Pokepelago guy, he was the one who confirmed the existence of Ultra Wormholes and Ultra Beasts. Faba developed Beast Balls and the containment mask for Type Null. But as far as developing tech goes, nobody can beat Colress and Bill. Colress has developed a number of smaller devices, but he also has technology that can combine the DNA of legendary Pokemon. Bill is not only the primary inventor of the Pokemon storage system that literally every region uses, but he was also able to combine DNA when experimenting with teleportation, and he was able to make an actual time machine. Now, I know that developing technology is not everyone's objective, and I also know that you can spend years on research that doesn't yield any results. But these professors are not only supposed to be experts, but the foremost researchers in their regions. And you don't get that kind of recognition without achievements. And scientists love talking about their research, so why don't we know the details of theirs? Now, I don't think that they are frauds or con men or anything like that because there's just no evidence to suggest that. It is possible that the developers just didn't think it was relevant to include those details in the game, but then you look at Sycamore talking about Mega Evolution, and he says a lot of stuff. He just says that as unknowns. And they could have included the same level of detail just by saying them as discoveries instead. It's possible that there's just very little funding, so the professors don't have the resources to accomplish much, and that would explain the discrepancy with tech if tech research and development is well funded, but the more biological sciences aren't. But maybe their English titles of professors are actually more accurate than their Japanese titles of doctor. They do some independent research, but maybe that's not what their focus is. Maybe instead they focus on teaching. Rather than being experts, maybe they spend their time gaining the solid but wide foundation that makes a good teacher. And that is what they're known and respected for. It even matches what we see in the Sun and Moon anime with Kukui and Samson Oak being the people who run the Pokemon school. But what do you think? Do you trust that the professors actually have accomplished more than we can confirm? Or do you think they just don't focus that much on research? Or maybe you do think that they are all imposters. Either way, let me know in the comments, and if you can think of any other discoveries or inventions that are directly credited to the professors, leave them down there as well. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. If you're new here, you can subscribe. And if you want to support my work in other ways, there's my Patreon. The link is in the description. I'm Umbreon Libris. I'll see you in the next chapter. Whew, okay, that was a lot of yelling.